talk about reoccurrence tonight. I don't know if you guys have ended up having that experience yet in your groups. Oops, my other thing isn't on here. Oh no, my outline's not on here, only this. Kate, are you still here?
Yes.
I don't know if you can do it. You know how there was another handout? I didn't get on and check. I'm so sorry, I forgot to double check it. But I'm missing a handout, right? That there was the, wait, now it's there. It wasn't there a minute ago. There it is. Never mind. Okay, so we're going to talk about reoccurrence. So I don't know if you guys have had the experience that in your groups of having someone sitting in group who is a survivor, that they're post-treatment, they've been out of treatment for weeks, months, years, and then all of a sudden they end up getting word that it's back. But it's not a little thing, it's a huge thing. It ends up really rocking the group because there's something about walking into that very first group session and people are going around and doing introductions and some of the stories are very difficult, and all of a sudden you get to somebody who's a survivor and they say, yes, this is my diagnosis and this is what I went through, but I made it and I've been out of treatment now for 2 years or 6 years or whatever. And that ability to be able to sit in the room with other people that are in treatment and say, I'm not in treatment anymore, seems to breathe the sigh of relief into the room, like, oh, look at there, there's somebody that made it. There's something powerful about having somebody post-treatment in the room. Well, what happens when that person then turns around 4 weeks later and says, I went for my scan and it's back? And it just can end up rocking a group. I can tell you personally, for me as a counselor, it can certainly end up rocking my world too, in terms of being able to cope with the situation, because there's something about holding on very dear to those victory stories of people being able to be on the other side of cancer. So let me stop at that point. Kathy, Liz, Katie, does that sound familiar? Have you guys had any interactions yet where somebody has gotten a reoccurrence while you've been working with them at all? Yes, okay. All right, all right, all right. Well, let's get into that then. I wanted to start off the presentation tonight talking a little bit about the fear of reoccurrence. The reason for that is because when you're one of the main reasons that I find that people end up coming post-treatment into the group are either one or two things. Either one is because they want to give back, is because they feel as though they've survived it and they want to be able to be in a situation to help someone else, which is wonderful. But the other reason is that they're having anxiety, is that they're having problems coping with the stress of the anticipation that it could come back at any time. And so that issue of fear of reoccurrence can be a huge thing that can end up building in support groups or just in a person's life. So I wanted to take a little bit of time and talk about some of the issues that come up around dealing with post-treatment fears. Okay, so the first thing I've got down here is cancer is frightening for everyone, more frightening if you're a cancer survivor. The reality is that statistics say that if you have had cancer, you are more likely to get cancer than a person who has never had cancer. And so that's not good news. That ends up making it a certain level of a reality that there really is something to worry about, which gets into my second point here. Typical types of fears, scan anxiety, worry, any physical symptom, could be cancer. That's part of what the reality is of looking at the type of fears of what being a cancer survivor is about. If I'm a cancer survivor, then I end up knowing that there is a higher potentiality that I'm going to have cancer than the person sitting next to me who's never had cancer. And so we don't have to walk around being afraid of things that are unrealistic. But the truth is that there's a certain part of being frightened of a reoccurrence that's a little bit realistic. The issue is should we end up letting it rule our lives, and how do we end up coping with that? I'm sitting in my friend's den and I'm doing this right now, and for me to have fear that a bear is going to attack me right now is not realistic, okay? But that's different than having a realistic fear, which might be that I'm going to stub my toe on the way out or something. Do you understand what I'm saying? Trying to be able to judge fears as being realistic or not realistic is important. As us as peer counselors, we need to be sensitive to what's going on with that. We need to be sensitive that we're not judging in any kind of ways about whether people should still be stressed out or not about their cancer. And the truth is that it makes sense for them to be able to still have some anxiety and tension about it. We just want to be able to help them find ways to cope with that stress. Okay, if that kind of makes sense. So let me look at number 3. Some fear and stress is normal and healthy. I call that eustress. We call that good stress. I'm going to show you a chart about that in a minute. It serves to anticipate negative consequences and take precautions, like a baby bear in the woods. Okay, let's stop here and let me change back to that other groovy, cool little chart. So this chart that I'm getting ready to show you is a chart that I've used over the years when I'm doing stress reduction workshops, stress management workshops. If you look at it, isn't this kind of cool looking? What you see is if you go across the bottom, it says stress, the level of arousal. So if you have a little bit of stress, you're on the left-hand side, and you have low, low, low stress. The right-hand side, you have high, high, high stress. Well, the truth is that this eustress is a place where you end up coping with the emotionality fairly low-key. Low blood pressure, low motivation, low anxiety, low tension. If you think of stress as not being just a negative word, but you think of it more as being the amount of energy that's running through your body, this eustress that's on the left-hand side of this chart is actually a lower level of energy that's going through your body. But let's face it, if I was doing this presentation right now and I was way over on my low, low, low stress level, I wouldn't be very good. I'd be talking very slow. Maybe I'm holding my head up. I'm doing this to you guys. That's not good. I'm not really exerting enough energy to be good at what I'm doing. And so if we think of stress as the amount of energy that's going through our body, then that becomes an important way of gauging where it's healthy and where it's not healthy. So eustress is a part where there's a low energy. So you can see that as it climbs, it then turns into distress, right? Distress is the point when there is too much energy. When we think of the word stress by this chart, we're really talking about distress. We're talking about, you know, if I was totally winged out and stressed out and trying to do this presentation, I wouldn't be any good at it either. I'd be ripping my hair out and yelling at the screen, or who knows what I would be doing. But that idea of being distressed, being over on the far right-hand side, of being too stressed out, is not good. But the irony is look at that line that goes in the middle. And the line that goes in the middle, if we go all the way to the top, says that there's a place of maximum performance. Peak optimal performance is what they call that spot. It's the spot where you have just enough energy to do the job good. You think about coaches before games, you know, before they have baseball games or football games, that they want to pump the kids up. They want the kids excited and energized and ready to be able to do this thing. And so that energy level becomes an important thing in order for them to perform at their best ability. You can probably think about whatever jobs that you have, that there are times that there are certain activities of things that you have to do. Maybe it's doing a speaking thing in front of a committee, or any kind of interaction like that, that you have to have a certain energy in order to be able to accomplish something like that. So what does that mean? How do we know then where that spot is? Well, if you look at the far right-hand side, you can see the word health, all right? You can see the word health. The point is that maximum point of performance way up high is a good, healthy place to be able to be. The way that we end up finding that we've slipped into distress, honestly, is because our body starts to fall apart. We start to be able to have problems sleeping at night. Our stomach isn't good. Our blood pressure isn't good. We have heart palpitations, anxiety attacks. We start to lose our hair. We have skin rashes. You know, the list of things that end up coming out on our bodies to be able to tell us this is not good, you are too stressed out, is huge. The list gets longer all the time. And so sometimes it can just be wearing down your immune system so that you walk around with colds all the time. You know, there's all kinds of ways that our body then ends up telling us that we are too stressed out. Okay? So kind of bear that in mind, this whole eustress, distress kind of thing that I'm talking about. And let's go back and look at again in terms of talking about cancer recurrence. So we're sitting there and we're saying, yes, it's realistic for us to be able to believe that somebody is stressed out and coping with that. But we want them to function at an optimal level. So what does that have to do with it? Let's think about this. If you don't have a little bit of stress, if you don't have a little bit of energy going through your body about the cancer coming back, you're not going to change your habits. Most people that end up surviving cancer end up needing to be able to change something, whether it's that they sleep more, work less, eat better, exercise more. There is a certain lifestyle that they have proven through testing, especially through eating and exercise, that can end up decreasing the chance of a reoccurrence. And so if that's true, there's Lisa. Hold on just a second, everybody. Allow everyone in. Hey, Lisa, welcome to the party, girls. Glad you're here. We were just getting started talking about reoccurrence. So the idea then is that reoccurrence is something that's very realistic to be able to be stressed about in order to get enough energy in your body to be able to make the change. And so if we have an attitude about this cancer coming back of, oh, no, it's not going to come back and it's no big deal and I got it all under control and la, 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 then perhaps there's not enough energy and tension in our body to make the changes in our life that we need to make. However, we could flip over to the other side of that chart, right? We could also end up getting to the point where it's like, okay, I am so stressed out now. I am so stressed out that I'm not functioning and my body's falling apart. And so that hypervigilance that can end up happening around, oh my gosh, I've got to make sure the cancer stays away, is an unhealthy place to be. So we want to be able to validate people that we understand that this makes sense for you to be anxious about whether you're going to have a reoccurrence or not, but it's really important for us not to let it control our lives so that it doesn't end up turning into creating the stress in your life to make you sick. And so we want enough of it to make changes, but not so much to make you sick. Okay? So that's kind of that number 4 thing. Stress equals energy. Eustress is good stress, motivating, stimulating. And distress is the bad stress that interferes with healthy functioning. So that's kind of one point. Coping strategies. So what should folks do in order to be able to cope with their fear of reoccurrence? The first thing is call your oncology if anything unusual happens, especially if your breast, any kind of place where you ended up having your cancer before. Don't wait for the next scan. Doctors will end up telling you that the oncologists want to be able to hear from you. That feeling that I should wait is difficult. Now, I know it's hard because sometimes it feels like your doctors kind of give you that, yeah, you're crazy, get out of here kind of feeling when you go and you tell them about some kind of complaint. But it's better to be able to do that. And if you've got a doctor that regards you that way, you got to find a new doctor. So that's kind of where I roll on that. However, let's go back to the list again. Second, call general practitioners if other type of concerning symptoms. Some doctors say give it 36 to 48 hours before you call about an ache or a pain. So if it's in the region where you had your cancer, you should call your oncologist. If it's some other place and some other thing that's going on and you don't know what it is, giving it 36 to 48 hours to be able to see whether it persists is not a bad idea. Okay? All right. And then what is that? Third dot says come up with a plan. Ironically enough, being a planner can end up helping to decrease your stress. I know that sounds a little crazy, but it's really true. Let's think about that for a second. So if you sit there and you say, oh my gosh, let's say that you got a lump on, you feel something that's up on your throat. And something just kind of feels weird and it's tender and you don't like it and I don't like that so much, but you just noticed it for the first time. Well, now I have a plan, and my plan says that my doctor told me to wait 36 to 48 hours before I end up calling for anything new that ends up popping up. So I'm going to watch this, and that means that today is 8 o'clock. And it is, I don't even know what day of the week it is, Tuesday. So that means I'm going to wait until Thursday evening. And if it is still there on Thursday evening or on Thursday afternoon, I'm going to pick up the phone and I'm going to call my doctor and make an appointment and see if I can't go in and see him. So now I have a plan. So now I don't have to sit there and stress and worry and create that anxiety over, is it this or is it not this? I'm going to let the Lord and my body take over from now until then, because I'm making a good, sound decision about when I'm going to end up calling my doctor. And so then that time comes, you make that phone call, and then they end up telling you what your next plan is. Okay, well, the next plan is that sounds important. You better come in tomorrow, or that's probably okay. You can come in on Monday. And then you end up focusing yourself on what's the right thing to do. Stress is good in our lives to help us make good decisions and help us to follow through and to be motivated enough to do the things we need to do. It is not helpful in our lives when it pushes us, once we have the plan of what we should do, to continue to fret and worry. Okay? And so use the stress to be a motivator to get done what we need to get done, not for it to be able to pull us down with trepidation when we're working the plan we've already set out. So, what do you guys think of that idea about a plan and letting a plan work as being something to reduce your stress? Mm-hmm. It's a great idea. You'll always feel better if there's a direction you're going. Good plan might be hard to wait in reality. Exactly. And it's not that you expect people to experience no stress over it, right? You don't expect that from anybody. But at the same time, you have to let the power of knowing I'm doing the right thing at the right time influence your thinking, if that makes sense. Part of how I end up working with patients, clients in particularly in my office, is I do a lot of cognitive therapy, and you guys can see that by reading the book, right? And so there's a lot of stuff in there that's about negative thinking, about changing negative thought patterns. And so by being able to let the plan and thoughts of the plan be part of my positive thought strategies can end up helping to be able to reduce stress if you let yourself focus on it. The places we focus our mind is incredibly important when you're dealing with anxiety. Doesn't matter if it's this kind of anxiety or others, but our mental capacity, our tendency is to try to focus on our emotions when we're anxious, and that's typically not the best way to change them. To change your anxiety really, really requires focusing on your thoughts, and so the plan can be a step for that. So let me see what time we're at, 8:07. We're doing okay. So you can see the 3 steps I did for coming up with a plan are decide what kind of precautions, what's the next thing you're going to do, commit to the next step, and then replace your stress and worry with other thoughts and activities. What's good and what's bad. Okay, and so really it's sitting there and kind of weighing it, of trying to be able to understand where's my good thoughts and where's my bad thoughts, and being able to get a focus in the direction that you want it to go. Okay? When stress and worry returns, then you repeat. Do this consistently. So in other words, no one expects for it to be a one-time thing. Okay, I decided, I punched it, I'm going to say 8 o'clock Thursday night, blah, 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 I'm not going to think about it again. That's not what happens. What happens is you let yourself get busy, you do other things, and then all of a sudden you're laying in bed, and it's quiet, and you start to think about it again, and you start to get stressed out again. And what do? You repeat your plan again. You repeat, well, this is what I'm doing the right thing, so it's under control. I've got it as under control as I can. And so you can, and then of course you focus on scripture, and you focus on the Lord, and you focus on prayer, all the other stuff that's in the book. So if that kind of makes sense, okay? Okay. So now let's talk about when reoccurrence occurs. All right, and this is the section that's for the person with the diagnosis. So what is that like? Let's really think about that for a minute. We all can probably think of someone that we know who has had that experience. Maybe it's a loved one that's been somebody close to us, or maybe it's just someone that you've worked with or heard about, or somebody from church that you didn't know that well. But we all can probably think of people that we know where the cancer came back. And it's difficult. Part of what ends up happening, look at the words I put down here about the emotional impact. The first thing I want to talk about is the future. You come out of cancer, and typically people end up putting a lot of things on hold while they're in cancer treatment. They get to the other side of cancer treatment and they start to make plans again. It's usually different. It's a different kind of sense of making plans about your future than it was before cancer treatment, but still, you're making plans again, and it feels good and it feels solid, okay? So that's what has to do with your future. But what happens when the reoccurrence comes is suddenly that gets snatched back. And this time when it gets snatched back, it's in a different kind of way, because you know some of what's getting ready to come. You give some know of what's going to be happening. And so trying to be able to sit there and look at your future, even after I get done with this next round of cancer treatment, becomes hard, because it's harder to live in that world that says, I've got the cancer behind me. I'm not going to have to deal with it anymore. And so even though after each treatment, of course, you could be in that place again, the Lord could end up saying, this is it, this is the blessing, that's the last one. We live in a place of knowing it can reoccur. You've experienced the reoccurrence, not just knowing it in our mind, but now having it happen in our body. And so it totally changes the way that survivors end up looking at their futures. And it becomes difficult to be able to focus on feeling strength about how you're making plans. Second thing I put down is fragility. I mean that in a literal kind of sense, is that emotionally it becomes harder to be able to feel as confident typically the second time around. People that have been through treatment, cancer treatment the first time, can be very strong feeling about, this is great, I've got this thing, it's going to be good. And yet doing that for the second or third time can become more and more and more difficult, of being able to have that focused determination that typically a lot of people can end up having the first time they go through cancer treatment. The next thing is I put down fear, kind of goes along with that. It becomes harder to be able to feel like you beat this thing when you have to go back through it a second time. And so even though the fears might have been something that was more controllable sooner, this time it's not. And of course, the big one is the lack of control. Depending upon how long since the person has been out of cancer treatment, typically it's been long enough for them to have a kind of sense of victory, right? If we're in this cancer battle and we've had a victory and we've defeated it and now it's back, how do we end up processing that about our ability to conquer something, and especially to be able to conquer cancer? And so it's a hard emotional place to be able to be. In many ways, it can end up being much harder than when they're diagnosed the first time, because of the fact that it's harder to grab a hold of your hope, knowing that a reoccurrence can happen to your body. And of course, the last thing I put down there was hopelessness with a question mark. I think it's real important if you're working with somebody and they get re-diagnosed, just to be able to really touch base and make sure that they're still feeling hopeful, because it can become very discouraging in the long run, whereas it doesn't. They may have been very hopeful during their first cancer treatment, and it may be a much larger issue for the second one. So I think as peer counselors, we got to keep our tabs on that and make sure that no one is getting suicidal or quitting or having those kind of feelings. Okay? Physical impact to that person. It becomes very difficult to be able to have a sense that they can have any level of confidence in their bodies again. A lot of times people will come post-treatment and they'll make the changes we talked about before, and they'll eat better, and they'll exercise, and they'll sleep better, and they'll cut down on their work and do those kind of things, and then it still comes back. And so what does that mean? What does that mean, that I did everything I was supposed to do and it still comes back? What is that saying about me and my body and my ability to be able to keep myself healthy? And so that's a huge physical issue that can end up doing. Also, I put down that your body's different because of stronger treatments. Typically what happens is that they go back and they say, okay, we're not going to give you the same thing we gave you last time. It's not going to be the same chemotherapy that you went last time, because obviously it didn't kick its butt hard enough. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you a stronger one. We're going to give you a stronger chemo. And so you may have thought the last chemo was difficult, but the odds are it is not going to be anything compared to this time. And if it hasn't been that long since the last time that you went through, your body even may not be fully recuperated in order to be able to withstand it. And so it's a really hard thing to be able to cope. And I put down here the need support this time, doing it differently. A lot of times people will end up looking back. When they get their reoccurrence, they'll look back at the first time and they'll be like, you know what, this time I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to do it differently by who I want in my life, how I want them in my life, the amount of time I want to spend with people, the way I'm going to handle my medical team. They've already gone back and looked at their first go round, and they can see that there are things they wish they had done differently, and they can become very determined to do it different this time. And that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing for them to have that take charge kind of attitude of what they're going to do with it. All right, scrolling on down. Spiritually, let's really talk about this one for a few minutes. When people have a reoccurrence, Christians end up having a reoccurrence, it can end up rocking their world in a way that the diagnosis doesn't, because there is such a feeling so often that they get through that first cancer treatment and they are told that it is gone, and they live in that victory. And it's not just a victory over cancer, is it? It's a victory in Christ, because they know that the Lord got them through that. And there is such a feeling of being blessed and connected with the Lord that when the reoccurrence comes back, it becomes difficult to be able to hold on to that connectedness that they ended up having the first time around. Because then there's this kind of sense of like, I thought I knew what we were doing, Lord. I thought I understood. I thought we took me all the way through this whole cancer thing and you were right there by my side. And so now what does this mean that it's back? What does this mean? And so we need to be sensitive as peer counselors of trying to be able to anticipate what that means and helping them to be able to stay connected with the Lord, and look for the things to be able to do that. Okay. All right. Caregiver. The caregiver issue is huge. I mean, just like it is for every other person that's connected with it. But I put down here emotionally, I put down, did they ever process the impact of the first diagnosis with the person who's diagnosed? In other words, was it long enough or was their relationship strong enough for them to go back? Let's say that they ended up getting through their first treatment and it's a year and a half later and they're on vacation somewhere and they turn to one another, whether it's a parent and a child or whether it's a husband and a wife, and they say, oh my gosh, that was really hard what we went through, and it was hard to watch you go through it, and you know, you weren't always the easiest person to live with while you were in cancer treatment, and sometimes I was so tired I just couldn't even stand it. Did they ever get the chance to go back and say the things about how hard the cancer treatment was on them to the person who had the cancer? If they didn't, this is going to become even more difficult. Because if they had, then there's a new playing ground. There's a new level field. That same thing that I just ended up saying, that the person that's got the diagnosis that has the reoccurrence may say, I'm going to do things differently. Well, the caregiver is saying that too. But the problem is that it could be that they've never shared with the person that was diagnosed the first time around what was difficult for them about the experience. Because it's hard when you're a caregiver as the person's in cancer treatment for you to be able to tell them how hard it is to be a caregiver. And so when the reoccurrence comes, it becomes hard to figure out how to make the changes that you want to be able to do in a way that's sensitive to what they're going through. I also put in the concept of what's next. I worked with a couple in one of my groups whose the gentleman had prostate cancer. It had metastasized to the bones. And she was probably one of the most outspoken caregivers I've ever had in group. And his wife would just look at me and say, I live constantly on the edge of what's next. Every time I turn around, it seems like there's bad news and bad news and bad news. Why can't my husband be one of those guys with prostate that they go in and they have the surgery and it's done and it's over with and they never deal with it again? Why does my husband have to be the one that's dealing with all this pain and all these procedures and all these surgeries? And so that's a hard answer. You know, that's a hard place to be. But as the reoccurrences were happening in her life, that what's next thing of that living on the edge, waiting for another bad thing to happen, became a way of life for her, and was a hard thing for the group to be able to cope with her, of being able to find ways to deal with it. Which, of course, also leads me down to that word of hopelessness, again, with a question mark. We need to check in with the caregivers, too, to make sure that they're all right. Impact physically. What if I get sick? No time for doctors. I think this increases tenfold when the reoccurrence comes. You guys know I've talked about it before in terms of caregivers in general, that they don't take care of themselves. But the fear that ends up coming with a reoccurrence, as well as just all of the expectations, can make this really, really difficult. Okay? And then spiritually, same issues as the person being diagnosed, just less verbal. Once again, caregivers don't have as many outlets of where they can end up sharing that. There's no question about that they don't end up having as many outlets to share it. And I think those breakout sessions that we end up doing during the groups can become really very important. All right, let me stop at that stage of the game and ask about questions. Questions, any stories or any comments you want to make about people that you know that have been through reoccurrences and what you think was some of the more difficult parts of them having the reoccurrence? Anything you want to add on that, guys? Okay, you chatty guys, you. I still love you. All right, so peer counselors. Let's talk about us for a minute. Lisa and Cindy and Jenny, you weren't here earlier. My leading off was talking personally about how difficult it is for me to be able to be working with someone and they have a reoccurrence. The reality is, guys, is that we fall in love with these people. We fall in love with these people. And there's something about the relief of working with somebody, and once they're in that post-treatment phase, that just feels good that we've accomplished that and we've gotten to that point. I can remember Roxanne over in St. Charles running a group. It was her very first group that she ended up running, and she would do these little parties. She had 2 women that finished chemo during the group sessions, during the 9 weeks they were doing group, and she had little parties for them, both of them. And she'd bring balloons, and she would end up taking a cake, and she took pictures of them and sent them to me, and they would have a little party to celebrate the fact that the people had completed chemo and how exciting that was. Well, one of them was re-diagnosed just within months of them ended up, they got to the end of it, say you're all clean. That first 3-month scan, they went back and it was already back. And just how devastating that was, not just for her, but for the entire group. And ultimately about, 4 or 5 months later after that, they were attending her funeral. And so that's not good. That's not an easy thing for us to be able to deal with as well as the rest of the people sitting in the group. So what have I written down here? If in group, people post treatment bring confidence and hope. When reoccurrence comes, can lead to discouragement. It's important to just face it head on. It's important that if it happens in a group setting, then you just need to be able to talk about it and add it obviously to your prayer life. You will see that it will come up as you hit the different topics and you're going through the materials. And that's a good thing, that the intensity of having to pray for this person in particular in the place of reoccurrence becomes important. It also, in its own crazy way, draws a group together, and it draws that need to be able to be with one another and to be able to stay connected can become really, really powerful. Next dot I've got is we become attached to perturbation and we feel the sense of loss personally. Don't kid yourself, I guess, is my first thing to coach you about your own personal loss. If it hurts and you're scared and it frightens you and it upsets you, that's all right. If you cry in front of them or in group and those things, those are all right. Don't try to feel as though I'm the leader and I'm the stiff upper lip person. That's not necessary. You guys don't have to do that. That's not an important piece of it. Okay, I see my Shiloh folks typing. Let me see what you guys got. It's always a challenge to say you're praying and convince them that the prayer is powerful. Exactly. It really, then that's what I put down the next thing about our prayer life. It becomes difficult because it goes back to that issue of prayers that are not answered the way that we want them to be. I prayed this and I mean, let's face it, that it was answered, right? Because you think of it, they're going through their cancer treatment, and the whole time they're praying, help me through this, get rid of the cancer, get rid of the cancer, get rid of the cancer. And what happens? The Lord helps them through it and gets them through it and gets rid of the cancer and gets rid of the cancer. And it's all great and it's all good. And then it comes back. And so those things rattle our prayer life, It's important to be able to stop and go back and see the prayers along the way. The smaller prayers become even more important. Let's just pray about this. Let's just pray that it's not in your lymph nodes this time. Let's just pray that the small prayers along the way become more important. But I know that feeling, and it's okay, and I know you guys do too, to be able to really acknowledge that that's the place that they're at. That's why I put down the last thing, impact on your prayer life. I want to read what Lisa's typing. Lisa, you keep typing, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you this part of it for me. Let me read it. It says, I think it helps to stop and have people recall all the ways God was faithful to them in the past. Yes, just remembering all the ways he provided for us before can give hope for the future. Absolutely. The prayers along the ways and the smaller things that can come up. But let me tell you what my own personal experience with this has been probably over the last 6 months. I have ended up praying, having people notify me about, I found a lump, I'm going back in for a biopsy. I find out about those things. Sometimes they're people that used to be in my groups. More often, it's folks like y'all. It's my cancer ministry leaders and people that are peer counselors, cancer companions that are trained, and they stay connected with me and they want my prayers, and it's wonderful. And so they email me and they're like, Karen, this is a new biopsy. Please pray for me for this biopsy that I'm getting ready to have, or please pray for me because of this test, or I'm going back down to MD Anderson, or all these different kinds of things. And you know me. If you've been around me when I prayed these things, I pray for every cell to be ripped out of these people's bodies and for there to be nothing there, and for the Lord to just do miraculous healing on these people, or for him to be able to use the doctors and the people that are involved in that. Well, what's happened to me is that I went through probably a 3-month period. Well, it seemed like every one of those times that I prayed that prayer for folks that were facing the possibility of a reoccurrence, they were not answered the way I wanted it to be. They were not answered the way, and these people were getting re-diagnosed, and they were having reoccurrences, and they were back in cancer treatment together, and it was very scary and very hard. And of course, I kept getting the emails. And then thankfully, the Lord gave me a season of flipping that over. And so probably over the last 2 months, I've had a stretch of a few people that have contacted me where the same kind of thing. I'm having a biopsy, I'm having a test, and I've been able to pray the same kind of prayer, and it's come back, and it was good news, and they did not have the reoccurrence. But I tell you guys, it impacts your prayer life. It impacts your prayer life. It makes you sit there and think like, why am I sitting here praying this prayer again? Because every time I seem to pray it, it doesn't seem to do any good. And all I can give you for that comment, Kathy, is that you can share that you've been there at that place. You know, I don't think there's anything wrong with us being honest about the bumps and the bruises that end up happening in our prayer life. But that sense of needing to stick with it and wait until the season changes, right? And we get back into that season again where the blessings come back. So part of it, I think, really is true. What Lisa is saying about going back and remembering the seasons where the blessings were being answered and the prayers were being answered in the way that you were asking. But it's also part of it is pointing out that that season can change, and we can find the new season where the new prayers start to, if we keep praying frequently enough to get the answered prayers. So let me see what Lisa says. It says, I think it helps to stop and have people recall the ways God said, oh, that's what you are. Just read that one. So we can give a hope for the future. But Lisa's still typing. I thought you were. This is good stuff, guys. Kathy, is there anything in particular about the person that you guys have dealt with reoccurrence that you guys want to share? And it's being open to new blessings God will give them in the next season. Yes. Yes, it's true. It's true. It's true. It's a hard thing submitting to the Lord in prayer. There's just no question, especially in a season where you've been praying and the prayers are not having the result that you're looking for them to have. It's a hard thing to do. She's extremely positive. That's good. And she was really an encouragement to us. That's wonderful. Absolutely. That's great. Well, that's good. I'm glad that that's ended up happening. So I hope that this talking about reoccurrence and your guys' impact on you is an important piece. It's part of why these supervision get-togethers are important, is because when things are difficult for us, we need to have that person to turn to be able to say, oh my goodness, this has upset me, hasn't it upset you? And to be able to pray with each other, with you cancer companions praying for each other, as well as praying for the person who's coping with the reoccurrence. I think it's those times that leaning on each other is extremely, extremely valuable. So I hope this is helpful. I hope it gave you a little bit of direction and some permission in kind of some of the ways that I was looking at, so that you can end up holding on to some of these things. Okay, guys? Lisa's typing. Some of their medications bring them down. Yes, that's absolutely true. Trying to be able to feel the impact of, um, yeah, if it's not unusual, and I know you guys have heard me talk about this before, it is not unusual for people that are in cancer treatment to be on antidepressants. And I'm not a big drugs, take a pill kind of person, but sometimes being able to get a little bit more endorphins running through their bodies is not such a bad thing. And so it's okay to kind of suggest that they ask about that if that's something you're comfortable bringing up. It's been very helpful. Thank you, Karen. Can I also request a prayer for my brother-in-law, Mark, who was just diagnosed with lung cancer on Friday? Oh, Lisa, sweetie, I'm finding out what it's like to watch someone you love dearly face cancer. Oh, honey, I am so sorry to hear that. I will pray for him in just a minute before we hang up. Let me see. What was it? How do you deal with that? How do you deal with that? Yeah, so one of them is antidepressants, Kathy, but another is being able to help them to be able to see that's where they're at and yet also sit with them in it, if that kind of makes sense. When people that you know are not typically depressed start to be able to have a depression, those are the two things that you really want to be able to do. You want to be able to make sure that they can see the impact that it's having on them. Depression can sneak up on people and build and build and build and build, and the people around them can see that that's what's happening, and yet they're not acknowledging to themselves that this depression is taking a toll on me. And so trying to be able to have a conversation, to be able to say, seems like this is harder this time, seems like this makes you sadder this time, and those kind of conversations is an important thing to do so that there's an acknowledgement of, yes, I'm more depressed, yes, I'm more sad, yes, this is more difficult, and being able to have that starting ground to be able to talk about it with. But then it's also taking it to the next point of saying, and I'm going to be here with you as you're in that. You know, I don't want you to think that your sadness scares me off, and I'm still here to be able to be with you in that sadness. That's part of what the kind of friend I want to be able to be to you. But of course, the last piece of the puzzle is to be able to keep a tab on their hopelessness. I kept that word in this a lot because I really do think it becomes more difficult in reoccurrence to be able to keep your attitude up and keep yourself positive. And especially because of the fact it's usually physically harder. It's one thing to be able to be at the beginning of a reoccurrence saying, okay, I did it last time, I can do it this time. But what happens 2 or 3 months into it when they find out, oh my gosh, this thing is kicking me so much harder than it did the first time around. And that's usually because their bodies are not necessarily 100% as they were before the first cancer treatment. And it's stronger chemo. Usually the treatments that they're giving them are more toxic than the stuff that they had in their body the first time. And so all of those thought processes that the cancer is getting worse instead of better, the cancer is getting worse instead of better, become much more difficult during the reoccurrence because of the fact that they're sicker. And so there's part of them that says, well, I know what it feels like to be in chemo treatment when the cancer's leaving. And that's not what this feels like. This feels different. Where the reality is it could be that they still are with their reoccurrence in cancer treatment and the cancer is getting gone again, but it just feels different because it is so much more toxic what they're putting their body through. So the openness, I think, is my biggest tip for you, is being able to make sure that you're the conversation, you're the place where we can talk about how sad you are. Don't let people fall into the depressions without really being able to acknowledge to them that you can see the depression that's going on with them. So yeah, so I hope that helped. All right. So we ran a few minutes over, but let me close in prayer for Mark. Oh, Lisa, sweet girl. Bow your head with me, guys. Lord, I thank you so much for this evening and these hearts that are with us tonight. I ask you right now to go and place your healing hand on Mark. I ask you to place your healing hand on him. Let him know that you are there. Let him know that you are there in all things, Lord. I ask you just to be able to step into his life and let him see you and know your presence. Be with the doctors and to be able to give them your hands and your discernment and your judgment as they are setting the protocols and the path for which he is going to follow. I also ask you to be with the people that are around Mark, to be able to comfort them and for them too to be able to see your presence through all of this. We ask you to restore him. We ask you to strengthen him. We ask you to give him courage. And Lord, we ask you to rip every cell from his body, every cancer cell from his body. We ask for you to just take this cancer and put it behind him once and for all. We know that you are strong enough and powerful enough to do that, whether you do that tonight in his sleep, whether you do that through the doctor's hands or through the medicine. We leave that in your will. And we leave all things in your will, Lord, because we know that you are mighty. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you, sweet ladies.